And good morning, everybody. Take two. We are live. If there's one thing that's sure about technology, if it can go wrong, it will go wrong. And so I did something this morning that caused a technical issue with the live stream feed here in StreamYard. So I had to create a new link. Hopefully you're seeing this on LinkedIn. If not, there's a link. Jason, I see you in the studio as well. No need to do that. I'll just kick you from the studio here, and you should just be able to watch like normal. So congratulations, everybody. You made it through the week. It's Friday. Thank you for everything that you do for food safety. I really appreciate it because a lot of times, as Kurt and I know very well from our experience, if things go well in quality, people tend not to notice. So we do. So good job. We really do appreciate it.
Absolutely.
So if you're new to the show, this is Food Safety Chat Live. And we do this show every Friday at 8 a.m. Eastern. I'm sorry, 8 a.m. Mountain, 10 a.m. Eastern. And I bring a food safety expert on for a chat around all things food safety. And my name is Brian Armentrout with the Food Leadership Group. And this week we have if you have anything to do with the food industry, you know this name. And so Kurt Westmoreland. Kurt and I have known each other a long time, and Kurt is with Flex X-Ray. How are you doing today, Kurt?
Doing great, Brian. Thank you.
Let's see, I'm getting another weird message here. I'm having trouble streaming to LinkedIn. So people in LinkedIn may not be able to see this, and that's okay. We'll have the recording up anyway. So we'll tell you what, if you can see this, put a comment in the section here and let us know. Otherwise, we're just going to forge ahead because Twitter and YouTube are working. So that's good enough. So if you're new to the chat, first off, thank you, everybody. We appreciate you being here. And I see, I shouldn't have put that link for the StreamYard into the thing because I think it's throwing people off, but that's okay. Been doing this for 3 years, Kurt, and you kind of, sometimes things go right, sometimes things go wrong, but I think we're getting it. So Kyle is saying that he can see it, so good deal. We're moving forward. So with our chat, one of the things, if you're new to the chat, that we love to do here at the beginning is everybody, please join us for a drink of your favorite beverage. I got some coffee here. What do you got, Kurt?
A little iced coffee.
A little iced coffee. Nice, refreshing treat. So with that, we're going to dive into our topic today. It's always very interesting. I'm doing a little self-reflection here as we're doing this, kind of the normal routine of how you do things, how easily those things get thrown out of whack, right? Which I think kind of goes in with what we're talking about today as well, which is what Flex X-Ray does and some of the situations where if you have a situation that's not quite normal, how you're dealing with that. So as we kind of dive in here, Kurt, why don't you give everybody kind of a summary of what it is that you're up to at Flex X-Ray?
All right, great. Thank you, Brian. So yeah, Flex X-Ray, we're a third-party inspection company for foreign materials. In terms of I spoke with Brian about this early, and to really simplify down what we do and think about it in terms of how the process works. We don't sell X-ray machines. We provide a third-party service. And coming out of the third-party laboratory business for many years, it's really uncanny how closely aligned what we do aligns with what happens in the laboratory business. But at the end of the day, if you think in terms of you've got an inline X-ray machine, you have an inline metal detector, you find a challenge or an opportunity for improvement, and you don't have an opportunity, or you don't have enough people, you don't have enough labor, time, line time, whatever it may be, to rerun the product internally or rework the product internally, we're a third-party service provider that does that for you. And you think in terms of the process, very much like TSA X-ray. So instead of running your suitcase through an X-ray machine at 4 feet a minute, you're sending us a truckload of product, and we're running cases of food through an X-ray machine at 4 feet a minute. With the flat panel detectors, where you have people that are looking for the contaminants versus automatic kickouts. So simplified, that's where it's at. We'll get into more detail through the conversation, but that's the simple version.
Very interesting. And yeah, so I've got a story that kind of puts this into concrete terms as we kind of go through this, because one of the things that's always very important in these types of fields is understanding your terms and your terminology, right? And so part of this around this is the frame around foreign material, because really when we're talking about foreign material in your product, it's something that shouldn't be there. It's foreign to the product.
Correct.
And in FDA terms, it always comes down to one of two things. When you get a warning letter or a 483 from FDA for something that happened in the field, they're always going to start off citing the regulations and the law of what you're in violation of. And that comes down to one of two things: is your product's adulterated or it's misbranded? And in this case, we're talking adulteration. There's stuff in the food that shouldn't be there. And a lot of times there's a process that's gone through to determine the class and all that type of stuff. And we're not really going to get into that. But one of the things that you see with recalls, and foreign material always, Kurt, is in the top 3 for issues. And when I see these things, and I post these on Locals when I do, and I'll put information on that here at the end of the chat, is a lot of times you'll see plastic or gaskets or things like this that if you're relying just on a metal detector, ain't going to work, right? So you have to make sure and cover those bases. And there have been companies in the past. So for example, Costco was very famous within their standards of saying, listen, X-ray is not, or metal detection isn't good enough. We want you to have X-ray too. I mean, they kind of moved the ball forward, but not really, right? There's still issues, and it hasn't really improved it. And I think the problem, Kurt, and I'm very interested to get your take on this, is that a lot of this is people forget that what we're talking about here with these type of processes to look for these type of adulterants in your product is this is really a verification activity, isn't it? It's not the actual process. It's kind of that last step, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a really good way to look at it. And because, when you think about foreign material getting into your product, unless you're including foreign material monitoring up front, like a lot of there are a lot of specifications and requirements that require microbiological testing, chemical testing. If you're supplying into QSR and certain retailers, there's a lot of requirement around what I call quality checks. A lot of people call them weight counts and balances, those kind of things, the quality of the product. But you don't see a lot of routine inclusion of foreign material inspection as part of those supplier monitoring or vendor monitoring programs. So where it occurs or where you find it is, unfortunately, it becomes an episodic event. Something's happened in the process, and it's either been a metal detector has found that there's something there, or an inline X-ray machine has found that there's something there. And it's unfortunate that that's kind of the way it occurs, and hopefully, manufacturers are finding it in line with their inline machines versus it getting out into commerce. And I think that is what happens most of the time. But once it happens, then it's the decision of what do you do with it?
Yeah.
Do you landfill the product? Do you try to rework it internally? Now that people know that services like us are out there, utilizing third-party services, which is and that's really why we're here, because it's still an industry and a service that somewhat in its infancy. A lot of people don't know that there's third-party services out there for formal inspection. So,
yeah, and definitely, and it can save you a ton of money. And I've got an example from my past that I was thinking about as when we talked earlier this week. So I worked in a plant that made cream cheese, and we had the standard metal detectors and these type of things, and different sizes of products. And one of our larger products that we made was like big 30-pound boxes of cream cheese. And this would be used for food service and, guys making cheesecakes and things like this. Mm-hmm. And the thing, Kurt, that used to drive me nuts is, so I would come in the office. And so I had kind of a unique role. I was head of quality for the company, but I also had an office in one of the plants. And so I would spend a lot of time there. And I came in one morning and there's a Whirlpack on my desk. And in that Whirlpack was part of a gasket, right? So about this much of the gasket, right? And there's this much missing. And I'm like, okay, fine, right? And so now you have to go through the process of where the hell's the rest of the gasket? Yeah. And so I have to wake up the poor sanitation manager, because most of the time sanitation in a lot of plants is overnight, which why would you do that, right? That's another topic. But so you wake the poor guy up and say, hey, there's this gasket on my desk. They say, yeah, one of my guys found it where do you find it? And you start your investigation. Mm-hmm. And it would always come back to a conversation with the management in the plant of, oh, well, it's probably caught in a strainer somewhere, or it went down the drain, or things like this. You don't know that. No, you don't know that. And the last thing you want is that showing up in product. And because it's a gasket, my metal detectors were useless. And now you've also got a giant box of cream cheese that's hard to test. And so I use services like yours in the past because, as you can guess, a full production run of 30 pounds of cream cheese, right? That's, you're talking, hundred thousands of pounds, lot of money. And so we were able to take that product, put it on hold, send it out for testing. And it may have been your company at that point in time that did that. And they were able to then run it through x-rays, use this highly sophisticated equipment that you don't have in plants, and figure out where that gasket was. And it was in that cheese. And luckily it was in one piece. And so we were able to then get rid of that box of cream cheese and save that entire production run. So was it worth our time and effort to do that? Oh God, yeah. Right. And so part of that then too, for that follow-up corrective action, and this is where it gets into that verification piece for everybody listening, is why did that gasket break? Was it in a line with where you've got a lot of tension, right, where the two halves of those stainless steel pipes are hitting each other a lot? Were they cranking down the clamps too hard? Or were they not changing them out? Was it the right type of gasket? A lot of times companies will buy cheap gaskets, and maybe you need a more expensive Teflon gasket that goes in that joint to keep that from happening again in the future. So we went through that whole process, and it allowed us, number one, to protect the public and keep foreign material out of our product, and two, to improve our processes. And we did it by saving the money and not having to throw all that product away. So that was a win-win on both sides.
Yeah, and it's a really good anecdote to the value that this type of service creates, because one of the things that we've seen at FlexRay is around 97% of the product that we inspect, and then it's an average, but around 97 to 98% of the product we inspect goes back into commerce. So for every 100,000 pounds, if you break it down into 100,000 pounds, for every 100,000 pounds that we inspect, 98,000 pounds is going back into commerce. Because when you go through the inspection process, the only product that you're pulling out and discarding is a case that, in this case, might have a piece of a gasket in it. The rest of it is repalletized, rewrapped, put back on the truck, and ready to go back into commerce. And so the ROI, when you look at the service offering, plus the fact that you keep the product out of a landfill, it's impacting your sustainability scores and sustainability numbers is just huge.
Yeah.
But you brought up a really good point around the gasket, and because at the end of the day, this service, and I won't get into the details of the science behind it, but it gets down to the density of the product matrix that you're inspecting versus the density of the contaminant that you're looking for. And since in this case you had a very dense cream cheese, luckily you probably had a pretty dense gasket so you could see it. But if you look in the standpoint of there are a lot of really cheap gaskets out there. There are a lot of really cheap plastics that are used for conveyor lines and those kind of things. And we actually have some customers that have started to do a little bit of research in terms of the types of products or the types of equipment or the types of things that they're using in their equipment to determine is it or is it not recoverable via X-ray. Therefore, as they go through maintenance and they go through their preventive maintenance and they're changing through, they're upgrading the level of the products that they're using within their lines to make sure that if there is a problem, it is detectable via an X-ray. And again, that's not just third party, but inline X-rays, because a lot of these low level or low density cheaper products that are used in a production environment aren't going to be found via an inline X-ray either. So then when you find them at that point, if you're not finding them in line, somebody's finding them downstream. So it's either your customer, if you're an ingredient supplier, or unfortunately it's a customer once it gets out in commerce. So
gotcha. Well, and I mean, part of this too, right? And we'll get kind of into the technical side of it, because you need to understand, as somebody in food safety or quality assurance, how these things work and what they're good at and what they're not good at. So a nice simple example of what you're talking about with density is us, right? So when we go in for an X-ray in the hospital, right, we get an X-ray and we can go in and see our bones. Well, why is that? It's because the density of the bones is greater than the density of your flesh and your muscles around those bones. And it creates a shadow then, right? So the X-rays don't go through the bone as well as through the rest of you. So that area gets exposed less. So it's lighter on the X-ray, and then you can see that. And it's the exact same thing what's going on in product.
Absolutely. That's a great analogy, because that's exactly how it works. Because when you get a really, really dense product with a really low dense contaminant, it's a problem. For example, bag liners, glove tips, safety glasses, the cheap plastic clear safety glasses. I mean, in today's world, in the X-ray world, unless there's an epiphany of some type, those aren't going to be found.
No.
There's some technologies that we're looking at that we think will improve to an extent on some of these, but it's those are always going to be a challenge. So it comes back to the type of materials that you're using in your process environment, to make sure that they're materials that, should something happen, that you're going to be able to recover them.
Right. And so with that, it's very important. And I love how you're taking this conversation here, Kurt, is step one that you need to do when you are looking at this type of equipment is, okay, what's my product, right? So luckily for me, with cream cheese, dense, great, consistent, awesome, right? So I've got a nice matrix that I can use for detection of different type of items. Now, let's say, for example, that I'm making a granola bar. And that granola bar's got chunks of nuts and oats and fudge and all kinds of other good stuff. And in that, I have all kinds of different density ingredients. And to your point, then, if I've got a chunk of something that shouldn't be in that granola bar hanging out, I can't tell. I can't tell.
Yeah, it becomes a bit of a challenge. And for those complex ingredients or difficult, or excuse me, matrices, or difficult matrices, the way this process works, and I like the fact that you use the word verification early on, but it's very much like, and again, I go back to my lab life, but it's very much like looking at a testing platform and determining, based upon the matrix going to be tested and the size of the sample it's going to be tested, does the platform work? Can you find a pathogen, whatever pathogen that might be? In our world, it's a bit different, but what we do is we work with a customer and we say, okay, you've got let's use granola as the example. You've got a granola bar that you think you may have stone. You may have pieces of stone in your granola bar. So how do we determine that? We work with our customer. We get the case of product sent into the facility. If you have an example of the exact stone that you think might be in there, and then pieces of it, we like to get those in. We can actually break them down to very small sizes. If not, we've got seeds, and we've got seeds that we can run. And we actually will seed the product. We'll put the contaminant into the product, and we'll run it through the X-ray machine. Looking to see if we can in fact find it. And if we can, then we can move forward with the project, because we know now that it's been tested positive that you can recover it. There are situations when if we can't find it in case, we'll take the product out of the case. By the bag, we can't take it out of the bag because we're not a processing facility, but we can take it out of the case, and we'll run what we call an out of the case project. We'll run it through, and sometimes because you're in that case, you're no pun intended, but in that case, you're running a smaller or a less thick bag through versus an entire case. You're able to see it a little clearer, or you might be able to see it. But that's all part of the testing process. We find it, we tell you, and then we're ready to rock and roll. If we can't find it, we tell you that. And that's the unfortunate thing, is we can't find everything. Now, one thing that has changed in the industry a bit, and I think it's good for everybody, is initially, let's say 16, 18 months ago, when we were doing this type of work, one of the things that we would say is if we did not have a specific level of repeatability as part of that testing process, and that repeatability is like 99%. Nothing's perfect in science. I need to go ahead and get that out there. Nothing's perfect in science, so we can't say it's ever going to be 100%. But if our repeatability in the test wasn't there, we would just tell a customer, can't do it, because the repeatability is not there. What we have started doing with customers, and it's working very well, is look, it's not repeatable 99% of the time, but we can see it 85% of the time. And so now the customer has the opportunity to make a risk-based decision. Depending on the product, depending on where the product's going, depending on the risk of the product, is the contaminant of concern a choking hazard versus a quality hazard, all those things that you go through in consideration. But now a customer can say, if you're finding 85, 88% of the time, it may be worth it for us to proceed with it, because the product's going to go in as an ingredient somewhere versus, throwing away 500,000 pounds or whatever the product may be. So,
right. Yeah. And that's a good point, because it's all risk based and it's trying to figure that out. And so the more information you have on your side, the better. So in a lot of ways, it kind of parallels what you would be doing for a micro investigation. So did you have a point of contamination, or did you have a sporadic contamination, or is it something that was continuous during the run? So like, let's say, for example, you have a piece of machinery that fails and a bearing breaks or something like that. And now all of a sudden, poof, you got a bunch of metal that goes in the product. And you then bracket that information, and the more data that can be got back to you, the more you can do to figure it out. So it's like, okay, well, we think we have potential metal shavings. They could be in this size range, and et cetera, et cetera. Then you can go through that process. And then to your point is you can make a decision as a company whether or not releasing what you have is correct or not, because we always talk in quality about bracketing. So how far forward and back can I go to make sure that I've caught what I need to catch? And figuring those things out is extremely important. And so again, going back to your product matrix and these type of things as well. And really it starts up front as well, Kurt. So I kind of wanted to talk a little bit with people about, selection of equipment, because a lot of times, the food safety person or things like this may not understand. And it's like, okay, is X-ray right for my plant? Is metal detection right for my plant? Maybe I can put inline magnets in instead. I don't know. And so you need to understand how these different type of things work. And I worked with a company that was producing fluid milk, so gallon jugs of milk, and they put in very sophisticated X-ray machines to scan those milk, just, your standard blow mold gallon milks. And we had a devil of a time setting those machines up, because a lot of that, to your point earlier, you had said it's automatic. So these machines, we're getting more AI and all these type of things. And it wasn't quite sure what it was looking at, and it was kicking all kinds of stuff off. And so we had the technicians in from the company trying to set this darn thing up, because in their food safety plan, that was a preventive control, as absolutely, right? So now whenever that happened, it would trigger these actions in their food safety system. And so it was just as constant, and they would open the jugs and nothing was there. So it can cause you a lot of headache if you don't set these things up properly and understand what it is that you're looking at.
Yeah, it's all about, with those inline machines, it is all about the calibration, or depending on the type of machine, a lot of times they'll refer to it as setting a recipe, around what's going on in terms of the product or the matrix that's being inspected. But that's not uncommon, that calibration. We have one gentleman that works in our company that came out of the inline X-ray, X-ray business, and he said, has told us in the past that one of the biggest challenges is they'll dial those machines in, and they'll dial them in to the point of a calibration where you're trying to find a very small seed type of a contaminant in a line, because you want to be you want to err on the side of caution, trying to find the smallest thing you can find. But depending on how the machine is calibrated, if you dial it in too well, you miss some of the bigger stuff, because it's you want to find the little stuff. And so, what we've had some customers start to do, and this is, and I won't bring a company name in, but there's an example of this last week. There's a beef company that's just getting into beef grinding, and there wasn't a ton of product. It was maybe 70, 80,000 pounds of product as part of their initial run, and their metal detector was kicking stuff out, or they were finding stuff. Now, again, new process, new metal detector that they're trying to calibrate. They don't know if they got a problem or not, or if it's the calibration of the metal detector.
Yeah.
So, we're going to run, 14, 15 pallets of product for these guys, going through the X-ray system, just to see if in fact there is something going on from a metal detection standpoint, or if it's the calibration of the metal detector, and they can go back and take a look at it. And that's in terms of staying out of this episodic business or the episodic world. That's a way to do that, and a way for customers or companies to verify, like you said, what's going on in the process. If there's a change in equipment, if there's a change in a metal detector, if there's a change in an inline X-ray, if there's anything done differently from a calibration standpoint, anytime there's a change in the process environment, whatever it may be, that could either impact what an automatic machine is reading, or impact what might be getting into the product, it's a good idea to send a few pallets or a truckload of product through a service, like us, so that you can see what's going on. Have you introduced anything into your process that's going to change it? Because if you have, you want to catch it early versus after the fact.
Well, that's a great idea. Yeah. So, and I think that's something that companies struggle with on the manufacturing side is this equipment's not cheap, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly right.
if you've got 5 or 6 lines in your plant and you've got a metal detector on each of those lines, you've got, $100,000 on each line, perhaps, depending upon how it's set up. You're talking significant money. And so to just buy another piece of equipment to run it through to say, let's see what we got, doesn't make a lot of sense. So using a company like yours to do that, I can see that, because that's an important part of your food safety plan is if things have changed, how do you know that your plan is still effective?
Exactly.
And really, when we're talking about metal detection and x-ray as well, is we were talking about the verification piece of it earlier, but it also really what we're kind of talking about here is validation. So you need to figure out what's the right equipment, and you need to understand the language of the companies that are producing this equipment on your side as well of, okay, what should the aperture size be? And you're like, well, what's the aperture size? Right. So that's that magnetic. Let's see if I can do this here. Right. So that's that size of that window that you are running your product through. So are you running individual little bars through? Okay, you can have a very small window. If you're running, like my prior example, 30-pound boxes of cream cheese, that window, that aperture of that piece of equipment that's doing the scanning is going to be big. And guess what? The bigger the aperture, the less effective. And that's why when a technician comes in and sets up that piece of equipment, they calibrate it, they validate that it works, and then they hand you those 3 little wands, right? So ferrous, non-ferrous, and stainless steel.
Yeah.
And those are the sizes that it can detect. And to your point, which I hadn't even thought about, is if you calibrate that machine and you validate it for just the little stuff, what about bigger pieces that it may not see? You need to worry about that. Other things on your setup that you need to worry about, as you'd mentioned earlier, line speed. How fast are you running product through that? Another thing people don't realize as well is even within that aperture, your sensitivity varies. So when you'll notice if you watch a technician from a metal detector company who comes in and is setting up your piece of equipment, they'll run it through on different parts of the belt as well. And that's because the sensitivity of that field is different at different points, right? So just picture like the magnetic lines and things like this. It's going to be different. So he's challenging it at its weakest points to make sure it's working properly. And to kind of close out my thought around this piece that we're working through is one of the things that these technicians always do once they set your piece of equipment up is they lock it down.
Yeah.
Because the last thing you want is some operator going in there and saying, "Oh, this darn metal detector keeps kicking things off. I'm gonna go in there and change the settings so it's not doing that." Right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's the last thing you want, obviously. But and you brought up a good point about the speed of the inline X-ray machine or the inline metal detector, because those things are running essentially at the speed of the production line, which is on average it's 120 to 140 feet a minute. So products flying through at 120, 140 feet a minute. And again, to your point, the aperture size is key, because if you're running individual granola bars versus a case of granola bars, you're going to be able to zero in on what might be in that individual granola bar versus the larger case. But once it gets into a situation where something is found or identified, and you go back to rework, or if you want to rework internally, you're still reworking at 100 to 120, 140 feet a minute. You're running at the same speed that the line was running to begin with. So what you're doing is basically rechecking what you did to begin with. And nothing wrong with that, especially if it's something that you got time to do and you can take a look at it and that kind of thing. When you look at a machine like ours, and I think I referenced, or a system like ours, and I referenced it earlier to TSA PreCheck, it truly is like TSA PreCheck. When we get these things in, they're running through at an average of about 4 feet a minute. So it's not just churning; it's running through very slowly at about 4 feet a minute. With a really strong X-ray. The X-ray, and I won't get into the details of it, tends to be about 2/3 stronger than an inline X-ray, just because of the size of because we can typically run a case size, it's like 20 by 36 is standard on our latest technology that we've got. But a very, very strong X-ray that's going into that. But you're also, again, running at 4 feet a minute. and you run it 4 feet a minute, and you've got people sitting there looking at it, just like you do with TSA PreCheck. So what you're looking for, again, we won't get into the real details of it, but it's a grayscale differential between the matrix of the product and the contaminant that may be there, and they're looking at those, trying to identify those with the naked eye. And you've got a screen, a person reading a screen at the front of the line, a person reading a screen at the back of the line. So you're looking for these contaminants that way. And that within itself is a difference in the process and a difference in really how you're looking at things, because running a stronger X-ray at a much slower speed just gives you an opportunity to find things at a level that you're not going to find if it's running through at 120 feet a minute. So.
Yeah, that's a good point, right? So yeah, you've got positive controls, so you know what you're looking for. And the TSA example, I like that too, because one of the things you'll notice when you're getting abused when you're going to the airport is that those machines aren't automatic. There are people looking at screens, right? And looking for things that are out of the ordinary or stuff like this. It's always manned by people. It's not automatic. So there's definite advantages to that as well. Very interesting. Okay. So are the machines in your company, are they pretty much all the same size, or are there like gigantic ones or smaller ones, or how does that?
That's a good question. Or what we call our next gen technology, they're all the same size. We do have some in the system that our legacy machines, they're a little bit smaller. The aperture size that we can get through those is about 20 by 20 versus 20 by 36. But we're phasing those out through the system. Nothing wrong with the machines. It's just that the next generation of the technology enables us to be more efficient and do things a bit differently. Because when you get a 20 by 36 through, you can run more cases or more projects through in the case versus out of the case. Those kind of things. But in terms of the technology itself, it's there's some differentials. I think the biggest part of it is the quality of the flat panels that we use for the screens on those. But the basic and the guts of the technology hasn't really changed.
Gotcha.
But it's just the newer aperture size. Now, there are some things out there in the marketplace, and I don't want to turn this into a commercial, but I'm excited about it, so I have to bring it up. I won't talk about the machine size, but it's a bit more of a true, if you think about it, it's more of a true CAT scan type machine that's out there that we feel like is going to give some opportunity to recover some of these, say some, not all. I'll go ahead and say bag liners and glove tips, not going to happen. But some of these less dense things that are difficult to find, we think we're going to be able to find those more frequently. The challenge with this particular opportunity is the aperture size of this machine right now is around. It's basically a sphere, and it's about an 8-inch sphere. So basically, anything that you're going to run on this technology, if it works, is going to have to be an out of the case project where you can fit the bag through there. But still, there's still a lot of potential for it. We're excited about it, and it's what we should have this piece of equipment in before the end of the year. Hopefully, have a lot of the calibration work done maybe by the end of the year, if not first quarter of 2024. So it's we got some potential things out there that can help us improve what we're doing for the customer base.
Well, that's a really good point. I hadn't even really thought about that, because in hospitals, right, they have all kinds of technology with magnetic resonance, CAT scans, all kinds of different equipment, right, when you're in the hospital that they use to poke and prod and look inside you to see what's going on. All kinds of different technologies beyond just metal detection and X-ray. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. Again, no guarantees, but it's something we're excited about at least evaluating and taking a look at.
Yeah, definitely. So one of the things as well with these type of issues when it happens, well, number one, right, you're making your product for a reason, and then something goes sideways and you have to fix it. And time is, of course, then of the essence. How many facilities do you guys have around the U.S.? How, if I have something I need to send to you, what's that network look like?
Yeah, right now we have 4. The corporate office and the original business unit that we opened up is in Arlington, Texas, and then then we have one right outside Chicago in Aurora, Illinois, and those are Arlington's the biggest one, Aurora, and then we have one in Fort Mill, South Carolina, which is essentially Charlotte, North Carolina proper. I think half a mile from our from our building, you're into the Charlotte city limits. That's
Okay.
how close we are. And then there's one in Vineland, New Jersey. We were up in Connecticut. We relocated down into Vineland, New Jersey a few months ago. And Vineland's about 30 some odd miles southeast of the Philadelphia airport. So we're kind of right there in that northeast corridor. So, yeah, and we're in the process right now of securing a location right outside of Vegas. We know that we need a location on the West Coast. We've looked, in a lot of places out there. And the one thing we like about that Vegas area is you can get to LA pretty easy. You can get to Phoenix pretty easy. You can get to the Central Valley pretty easy. You get to Northern Cal pretty easy. And that's one thing that, our goal is to have these facilities where they're around a 6-hour drive from the major food manufacturing hubs in the country. And so where we're at right now, we know we're pretty well located, but that West Coast facility is something that we really need. So we'll be there soon. Hopefully we'll be into that facility by the end of the year and ready to start processing by first quarter of 2024. So
nice.
Exciting.
Yeah. So if you got product and you need to get it, you need to get it shipped out there right away. As we were talking and prepping for this call as well, too, one of the things that you were talking about, which I thought is a great idea, is new suppliers and making sure, right? So if you run a risk of producing foreign material in your products through bad systems or things like this, or PM programs that aren't working right, well, that means that your suppliers may have issues too. So if you're bringing in product, let's say from a new supplier, or you've been having issues with a supplier, you may not be too comfortable with them. So verification of different products is probably a good idea.
Yeah, it is. And we, that's something again that we've started to see a bit of uptick in our business around that. Because again, it's a change in the thought process, and we know that there's supplier programs out there that I think I mentioned earlier. They've got microbiological requirements, you got chemical requirements, and if you're supplying into restaurant and retail, there's an awful lot of specification requirements around the quality parameters of whatever product you're buying. But this piece of checking and monitoring for foreign material as part of the program is not part of the routine. And I'm not sure that it'll be, because those programs I'm talking about, those are programs that's like depending on the product type and the risk of the product, it may be that you got to submit samples to a laboratory every month or every week, depending on what it is. And in our case, I'm not sure that it would ever be something that you would do with a supplier. You say every load of production that you're going to produce has to go through a third-party inspection. But as part of a checks and balances type system, we know that there are people that are considering saying, okay, once a month we want a truckload sent through a third-party inspection service, because we want to understand and see what's going on out there as part of, especially if it's a supplier that there's been some foreign material challenges with in the past. Where we see that there's a bit of a different stance being taken, and I'm excited about it, not just because it's a good for business. I'm excited about it really from a food safety standpoint. As people start looking at and doing due diligence on these suppliers, they typically are going to send an auditing firm or a consultant or somebody into a facility to do a due diligence audit. As part of the due diligence audit, they're typically going to want to see environmental swab programs. They're going to want to see testing data. They're going to see all the things that tie up into a food safety program. And we're starting to see some folks as part of that due diligence process, when they go look at a new supplier, say, okay, hey, we'd like for you to send a truckload of product over to FlexRate for us to inspect it, and let's see what's going on in the process. Because the customer may not even know, the supplier may not even know or have any idea. And so it gives both of them a chance to see if there's anything going on in the process at that time. So,
yeah. Well, and the example we were talking about too, which got me thinking about this, was let's say that you're producing a product and you're buying lots of chicken. And chicken is, there's always a potential for bone fragments or things of this nature. And you want to make sure that your new supplier is doing a good job. So you're able to then say, hey, listen, your new supplier, we want you to send the product out for verification. We want to get a baseline level of how you're doing on bone fragments in the chicken that you're supplying us. And then you can work with them and set some benchmark levels and things of this nature. Of course, you want zero, but is that possible in those situations? But if you're able to work with your supplier and improve those metrics and reduce the risk, great.
Yeah, and in that case, it's a win-win for the supplier and for the let's say it's a restaurant chain or whoever it may be, because at that point you're getting ahead of problems before they get out into the public.
Right.
Before you have a customer turns around and says, "Hey, I had a chicken tender that had a pretty good sized bone in it. This is a problem." And the one thing I have seen in the industry is, and very much like on where I came from in the other world of food testing, is the suppliers tend to work very well with the customers that have these type of specifications in place, because usually in the world of restaurant, like you were talking about, or even retail, you have, whether it's private label or products that's going into the particular restaurant chain, you have a limited number of suppliers. And all those suppliers, and you being a small limited number, they want to do the right thing. They want to do the right thing by their end customer, and that is they want to make sure that they're keeping problems out of the process. And what we've seen is those guys tend to work really well together, from a corporate level at the end user to the manufacturer, and to that specific example you just brought up. It's we had a customer probably 6 weeks ago now that was starting to supply to a large food service restaurant chain. It had not done it before, and as part of their initial production run, getting ready to supply to this chain before they had released product to the customer, they sent us several truckloads of product looking for bone, because they wanted to make sure that what they were doing in their process was not going to be introducing bone into the process of the customer, because the customer's monitoring it, and they're going to get ahead of that prior to the customer telling them they had a problem. So,
wow, that's so smart. And really, I think it's just another way of reiterating what we're talking about here, which is your X-ray, your metal detection, these type of things in the production facility is just your final last check. It's not your system. Everything upstream is your system. So what are you doing? And I think that's one of the key takeaways I think people need to have from this conversation is what are you doing in your process, and even from your suppliers, to make sure that foreign material is not there to begin with, because garbage in, garbage out. If you do a good job of keeping these things out of your raw materials, well, guess what? Now you don't have to worry about it in your product. So the more you think upstream of that equipment, the better off you're going to be. One of the examples I use in the production facility, Kurt, that I think is relevant is we all have these plexiglass shields on our machinery, right? So, the OSHA people and the HR and the safety, and they're right to do this. It's like, okay, here's this dangerous machine with all these moving parts, and let's put a guard on this machine so that the operator's not reaching in there and hurting themselves.
Yeah,
100% agree. Those shields, as we all know, right, if you have something that the operator needs to check, they're constantly opening and closing and slamming these things, and those plexiglass shields get damaged. Yeah. And sometimes little bits break off. And that's always an embarrassing conversation. If FDA is in the plant or things like this, and they're inspecting your equipment, and they're looking at broken plexiglass shields, and there's a big chunk missing, and they turn around to you and say, okay, Mr. Westmoreland, where is that missing piece of plexiglass?
Yeah. Did you?
And you're like, yeah. Right? Well, that's been like that for the last 3 months. Really? So 3 months worth of production is potentially at risk then, right? That becomes a very awkward conversation.
Absolutely.
So you need to have, and this is something that I always emphasize when I go into plants, is everything upstream. You need to look at that. So look at that piece of equipment and say, okay, as my product's going down that line and it's exposed in this machine, what are the things that can fall off? What are the bits of wire? Where are the twist ties? Where are the little pieces of plexiglass? These type of things that can fall into the product. Document all those things and do a daily inspection, right? Everything is about bracketing. That's what we're talking about here today. So if I am doing a daily inspection, Kurt, on that machine, and I know that yesterday that bolt was there and today it's not, where the hell did it go?
Yeah.
Is it in the product? Did they forget to put it back on when they cleaned, and these type of things? And if I can't find it, guess what? I've got a load of stuff coming to visit you.
Yeah, and it's not always, and a lot of people will try to refer to this and say, well, should we include this into a HACCP plan? And I think there's some risk in that, because when you start to look at including into a HACCP plan as a critical control point, as part of that critical control point, you've got to have that final validation verification step of that critical control point. And if you're looking at true X-ray, the kind of work that we do, that's difficult in a routine management program, because you've got to run your business. Now, inclusion of metal detectors, obviously I think those are pretty much in every HACCP plan. But the routine, this final step of it's difficult. So what I encourage people to do is to look at it and think of it in terms of a risk management program, because at the end of the day, your HACCP plan is a part of a risk management program, and your overall food safety program should be a risk management program. How do you limit risk to your organization, to your company? So think of it from that term, in those terms, and in terms of looking at it that way, how do we enhance the risk management program so that we're reducing the risk of getting stuff into commerce that shouldn't be there?
Yeah.
Looking at it from that perspective is a little bit different, because to your point, now you've got this missing piece of plastic. Okay, you're not worried as much about, it's going to be outside of the HACCP program, it's going to be outside of this. No, we're limiting risk, and what do we got to do now to limit risk of getting that out into commerce? So
yep, absolutely. And so, I mean, really, it's what you're doing in your business is special circumstances. So you have your plan, you think everything worked right. Oh crap, right? Something didn't go the way you thought it should go. So as I referenced earlier in our conversation, it's like, okay, let's get back on course. Let's protect public health. Now let's go back and figure out what went wrong and prevent it from happening again, right? This is what continuous improvement is. And it's just those little steps, that blocking and tackling. Now, I've got to ask you this question, because I've had some really weird stuff in my past. I've had wallets that were found in like a 2,000-pound tote of powder, giant sampling spoons that customers return to us, and these type of things. What are some weird things that you found in your business?
Early on when I started with FlexRay, probably is about 20 months ago now. It's been a while. But when I started with FlexRay, one of the first things that we had found was a $50 bill. It was on top of a block of frozen beef, or I think it was frozen beef. And but the line operator was kind enough to turn it into the plant manager, and the plant manager sent it back to the customer. So we sent the $50 bill back. But somebody working in that manufacturing facility wasn't happy at the end of the day. That was for sure. We had another one this one was actually fairly recent. And it was in a pork product. It was a wild pork product. The company was doing some different stuff where they were doing some dehydration. They were sending in some of the trim before they did so, and we found a full bullet. Like the bullet had the wild hog had been shot. The bullet had entered it, and I don't know if it didn't get a bone or didn't get solid enough where it exploded, but the bullet tip, the entire thing was there. So that was kind of uncommon. And then I guess for me, I don't think to the other folks at FlexRay, this is not as big a deal, because I think they say it all the time. For me, I always find it kind of interesting. It's not uncommon for us to have a request to look for buckshot, specifically more in beef products. And believe it or not, it tends to occur more often around dove season, when the dove hunters are out in the field, and maybe they end up getting into some beef hides one way or the other, and so we do end up sometimes looking for buckshot. So those are some of the more interesting things. But we look for everything. Metal is probably as a whole is probably the most common thing that we're looking for. Different types of metal. In protein, probably bone. You mentioned bone earlier. Looking for different bone sizes, and bone fragments are big. But we look for little bitty wires, and we can find those depending on the matrix and what's going on. We've looked for broom bristles. We've had to look for broom bristles in the past. Again, I mentioned stone, so it's glass, different types of glass. It's not unheard of, and one of the things that we haven't done in the past and we're looking to do, and we're going to explore this. We're actually exploring it more right now. Is typically when we find these things, it's called contaminant retrieval. We'll tease them out of the product. We'll put them on kind of a cardboard sheet, tape them down, and we send them back to the customer so the customer sees what was there. so they can try to do the backtracking in their facility and see what's there. We've had a lot of our customers tell us that when they get it back, depending on what it is, they'll then turn around and send it out for forensics work to determine okay, exactly where did the metal come from and what is it, and what is the the composition of the product. So we're looking at working with one of our potential partners right now, where we take that step out of sending the contaminant back to the customer, where we just take it. Hey, we found metal. We can send it to our partner, so we can go ahead and do the further forensics on it if he wants to do it, and we'll take that step and send it right there to them. I think there'll be a lot of value in that for the customer, because it'll slow down that you get it back and then you send it off again. I think there's a real opportunity for us to do that. So,
well, and that's a really good point. And it gets back to what we were talking about, is just saying, okay, shoo, we found it. Well, no, okay, that's great, but why? Why did this happen?
Yeah.
And in the in these examples that we're talking about here, so the sampling spoon and these type of things, right? That's all post metal detection, right? So very, very sophisticated company and plant that had this issue. GMPs, right? So there was a failure in the GMPs. So it doesn't matter what things you put in place, you have to have the right support. You have to have your preventive controls. You have to have your prerequisites. You have to have good GMPs. To your point earlier, Kurt, if glove parts get into it, forget it. It's very, very hard to find. So you need to make sure and do the work up front to keep these things from happening. I remembered another little story here as well. Is wedding ring. We had a wedding ring that was found in product, and it was inscribed inside and everything, and so we knew whose it was. So we approached this person and said, "Hey, you wouldn't happen to be missing a wedding ring, would you?" And he had gone out and bought another wedding ring, and so he had a wedding ring on, and he's like, no, right? So he was staying out of hot water with his wife at home, and so he went out and replicated the ring and put it on. We're like, okay, well, now you have two.
We're doing you a favor here, I guess.
So GMPs again, right? So so we talked a little bit about MRI and things like this as well. What other type of trends out there do you see coming in this industry? Is there anything out there that you can think of?
I've got to imagine some of the inline X-ray machines or X-ray manufacturers will start to include some AI, some additional AI into what's going on in the machines or in what's there, just to enable the companies to be able to make more timely decisions. I think we'll start to see that. I think I mentioned some of the new technology and some of the things that we were starting to look at. The other thing that you find interesting in this industry is, the foreign material inspection is by far the biggest request, and it's a big need. But when you're looking at different types of products, specifically canned products, whether it's canned dog food or canned soups or canned sausages or whatever it may be, one of the requests that's not uncommon is customers are also interested to see if there's what the seal integrity is in the can product. And so it's not uncommon for us to get products in or projects in where they ask us to do the X-ray of the product, make sure there's nothing in there, but then turn around and take the same product, and we run what we call a tap tone, but there's a tap tone analysis where you're doing the seal integrity on the product as well. So that's becoming a bit more common, and I think it's because again, it's all about keeping product in commerce, but keeping safe product in commerce. And the last thing these canners want to do is to have leakers that are out there in the system. So.
Especially that's a huge risk then. So part of this as well is one of the things I say here on the chat as well, Kurt, is that you need to have good outside expertise. So you need to know a good food safety lawyer, right? So if something does go wrong, you can pick up the phone and you've already built that relationship. And I think it's the same in this case as well. So you have your email on there, which is great. So build that relationship in advance, right? Because the last thing you want to do is you have, product on hold, customers aren't getting their shipments, and you're scrambling around on the internet trying to find somebody who can help you out. Not the time to be doing that. Build those relationships in advance of an issue. Prevent it if you can, but if something goes sideways, you need to have those relationships in advance.
Absolutely. And that's what we want to work with customers. And even in the type of work that we're doing, we're encouraging customers to do what we call portfolio builds. And that is, that testing process that I alluded to earlier on, where you have to send in a matrix, and we look for different seeds and whatnot within there. We'll work with customers so that if you've got 5 to 10 whatever SKUs that you've historically had some problems with, let's go ahead and get those in. We'll go ahead and do the seed checks, or we'll go ahead and do the testing, build a small database for you that says, okay, now we know these 10 SKUs, we can find this, and this. So that, unfortunately, if you have an event, instead of having to send the product in, do the testing then, which slows down the process, we've built that portfolio for you up front so that you can just say, we can look at it and say, yep, SKU 1, we can find ferrous metal, go ahead and get it on the road, and we get it. And we can save 48 hours in the process in terms of getting inspected.
Nice. Yep. Preparation is key. So we're getting short here on time, Kurt. So as we kind of bring this back up to the 30,000 foot level, what do you want to leave our viewers with today? What are some thoughts?
I think to me, the big thing is, and when you're thinking food safety, a lot of times people think in terms of microbiological, chemical, or allergens, those type hazards. But when you think in terms of food safety, your foreign material program is just as vital a piece of it as those other programs. And Brian, you mentioned it earlier on. That foreign material tends to be in the top 3 typically of what's going on in terms of food recalls, and we do know that there was some data actually released last month, looking at through my former employer actually, that was they were looking at year to date food recalls, and I think number 1 year to date had been microbiological. If it wasn't number 1, it was number 2, and then the second one, the first one, whichever it was allergens, and then foreign material was number 3 year to date in terms of what's going on. So keep in mind, your foreign material is a big part of the food safety program, and we're obviously here to help you out.
Nice. Anything coming up? Any presentations or shows you're going to be out? If people are out there, you can say hi to them, or
we'll be at Supply Side West in the 25th, 26th of October. So we'll be there for that. I am doing a webinar next. Looking at it right now, that webinar is next Wednesday at Wednesday the 11th, and I'll have Amanda Fisher from Schreiber will be doing that webinar with me. That's at 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, or excuse me, 1 o'clock Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. So anybody who can attend that. And that one, you've mentioned a couple of times supplier and ingredient manufacturing. Taking a look at that one is geared around supplier monitoring type program. So that would be a good one for folks who want to be able to attend that.
Nice. I love it. Yeah. So plan for the best, but prepare for the worst, right? And so hopefully you'll never need Kurt's services, but man, if you do, you better have that connection set up. So
that's what people tell us. We hate to use you, but we love it when we do, because you guys do a good job for us. So
absolutely. It's what we do in food safety all the time, right? Is like we said at the beginning, is if you're doing a good job, nobody notices. So keep it in that field for sure. So with that, we'll bring the chat here to a close today. And Kurt, thank you very much. This has been super informative. This has been a really good chat. I've enjoyed this a lot. And again, apologies everybody for the technical issues here at the beginning, but that's just life. You got to go with the flow sometimes. So we will join you back here next week at the same time. So 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern for the next Food Safety Chat live. And I'll have another expert on to talk about all things food safety. So thank you everybody for everything that you do. Enjoy your weekend. Kurt, have a great one as well. Thanks for joining us. And we'll see everybody next week. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Appreciate it. Bye-bye.